And here's the webinar pane. Here you see a presentation which says CR for pre-thinking, pre-thinking for assumption CR1. This is what I call as the presentation pane. I'm going to move the presentation over here. This is the presentation pane. Below the presentation pane is the Q&A or a question and answer part. I'm moving that. If you have a question, post that question over here. And then on the right-hand side is a place where I'm going to ask questions and you're going to put answers. There's a short answer part over here. From time to time, I'm going to bring in multiple choice questions. I'm also going to bring in sometimes multiple response questions. So overall, throughout this webinar, I'm going to ask about 60 to 70 questions. The goal is to make sure that we get both qualitative and quantitative input from you during this webinar so that I can get feedback on how the webinar is coming along. Okay. And again, for those of you who just joined, the webinar is being recorded. So in case you leave, you're going to get a recording. For those of you who want to keep a recording for future reference, you're going to get that as well. Also, I'm going to share the PDF with you. So you're welcome to take notes, but you will get the PDF. So just be aware of that. Okay. So there are essentially three parts of this webinar. In the first part, I'm going to talk briefly about how should you approach your GMAT preparation. Okay. So that's something that we're going to really talk about this over here. The second piece is where we're going to go into the core of this webinar. It's going to be about 120 minutes, and then towards the end, I'm going to leave about 20 minutes for Q&A. If you have questions about any aspect of your GMAT preparation, if you have questions about an e-GMAT, a particular e-GMAT offering, I'd be happy to answer those as long as those questions are posted here. If you have questions about the deal that we have going on, I'd be happy to answer those as well. Okay, and thank you for the appreciation note. If you have questions, you can please post them towards the end. All right. So first thing, if you're planning to study for the GMAT, if you are currently studying for the GMAT, one of the most important things that you should have is you should know how to get to your target GMAT score. And this is where having a personalized study plan is absolutely useful. This is what ideally, if you're preparing for the Focus Edition, this is what your PSP should look like. If you're an e-GMATer, you already have the PSP tool, which builds a PSP like this. e-GMATers who are planning for the Focus Edition, how many of you have created your PSP using the new PSP for Focus Edition tool? Let me just bring in my poll question here. How many of you have created a PSP or have created your PSP? It's only for paid students, not for people who haven't purchased the product. If you haven't, please go create your PSP. Make sure you take the Focus Edition mock or the official Focus Edition mock and create the PSP. If you're aiming for the classic edition, do the same thing. Make sure you do create your PSP. That's really important. You should know what would your journey look like. When is it that you're going to do which section? What metrics are you aiming for? And how do those translate into accuracies in easy, medium, and hard? That's really important that you know that on day one. If you need help with that, write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. Okay. Really, on day one, you should know, we actually call this day zero as well, the focus area. So here in this case, you can see this graphic. Your starting abilities in CR and RC are lower, so they are parts of main focus. Arithmetic, GITA, and MSR, the abilities are slightly higher. So essentially, this is where you're focusing more on refinement, but CRRC and to a certain degree arithmetic, you focus on first building a foundation and then moving forward. I think that map of where you currently stand is really important. And this is something that you can get there. Now, if you're aiming for the classic edition, you have 4 subsectional abilities, 2 in verbal, 5 subsectional abilities, 3 in verbal, 2 in quant. If you're aiming for the Focus Edition, you have 8 subsectional abilities, 2 in verbals, CR and RC, 2 in quant, arithmetic and algebra, and 4 in data insights, where you have data sufficiency, GINTA, MSR, and 2-part analysis. Okay, and this is what your study plan should look like. This is a really complex chart. It's actually a screenshot from our personalized study planner. Each one of you should have this. If you're aiming for that PSP, this is where your current scores are. These are your scores out of 90, or as well as your percentiles over here. These are your target ability scores. This one, as I said, is a very complex chart. This is for someone who's aiming going from a 575 to a 705. This is the amount of time you're going to spend on verbal, on quant, on DI, and this is the amount of time you're going to spend on stage one, which is building the fundamentals. Stage two, which is cementing, which is something which I'm going to talk about, and stage three, which is exam readiness. This includes taking mocks overall. Again, you should know this on day one. If you don't know this, please build your study plan. If you have questions about this, write to me. Again, make sure you are ready for this. Okay. And when you know this, that's what leads to success. Because you know where you need to put your energy, and if you're moving in the right direction overall. And this translates to at a subsectional level as well. You can really see here you have verbal, quant, and DI. Within verbal, you have CR and RC over here. You have precise timing. You have starting points, target abilities over here, and you have this total time as well. Okay, and it's because of this. It's because of this granularity, this personalization that we've accounted for the kind of success that you see on GMAT Club, and yeah. Also, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I usually post updates on our products as well as what's going on in the MBA and the GMAT world. Okay. With that, let's get into the second part of this webinar, which is pre-thinking. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about pre-thinking in the context of CR as well as TPA, because the core skills in pre-thinking as well as in CR, they apply to TPA, CR, of course, TPA as well as MSR. So we're going to do one TPA question just over here as well. So how would we go about doing this? We're going to understand how do you go about solving CR questions today, and we're going to I'm going to teach you the concept of pre-thinking because many of you have not gone through the prerequisites. So I'm going to spend about 20 minutes doing that, and then we're going to solve 3 arguments and solve 2 full-length questions, and then we're going to really talk about what should you do from this point on to improve your ability to that next level. Okay. Overall, this webinar from this point on is going to about an hour and 20 minutes or so. And again, for those of you who've just joined, this webinar is being recorded. So in case you miss and you have to go, you will get the recording in an email. Okay. All right. With that, let's discuss how you approach CR questions today. Okay. So before I talk about what do approaches to pre-thinking, to approaches to CR question, I want to talk about what pre-thinking is. Pre-thinking, as this definition says, is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in 15 seconds before you look at answer choices. Now, this is pre-thinking in the context of assumption question. If you're talking about strengthen, it's about thinking one potential strengthener. If it's weaken, it's one potential weakener. It's boldface, again, one potential answer choice, correct answer choice. A skilled pre-thinker is able to do this in about 15 seconds, and you've got to do this before you start looking at answer choices. Now, pre-thinking is essentially a litmus test that ensures that you've understood the information that's presented to you. Now, why is this important? Because in CR questions, in CR answer choice, so there's a lot of new information, and the moment you start looking at this new information, your brain is corrupted, and we want to make sure that you understand the logic of the argument before you start looking at the new information in the answer choices. We were the first company to come up with this term, and before that, there was another term called paraphrasing, which meant predicting the answer. Pre-thinking is not predicting the answer. Pre-thinking is simply a means to ensure, it's a litmus test to ensure that that you're able to you comprehend the logic that the author uses in the argument. Okay, I have a question from Sony. It says it happens sometimes, not for every question, but for some questions, I'm not able to pre-think in 15 seconds. What should be my next action here? All right. Okay, it's a great question, and there's a principle behind it. If you're good at something, this is what it seems Sony is. He's good at something, and you solve a question of a certain type, and you find that you're in certain instances you're faltering or you're taking longer. What do those instances present to you? What do you call those instances? If you're good at something, but then in certain aspects. Let's say you're good at solving math questions, but some math questions seem more challenging, take longer. What are those math questions for you? These are opportunities to improve. These are areas that expose shortcomings in your ability to visualize information. So if you're taking longer, then figure out which aspect of visualization did you take longer on, why did you take longer on it, and spend another minute and a half over there, so that for the next question that actually tests the same aspects, you don't take longer. So take this as an opportunity to learn. That's all I would say, because there will be questions where you won't be able to do this in 15 seconds. And those questions, if you spend more time on them, you're going to make sure that the next set of questions that test similar things, you're able to succeed over there, and which is the whole point of refinement. Alvin says, can we pre-think in bold first questions? Absolutely, you can pre-think beautifully in bold first questions. And pre-thinking helps tremendously over there. Okay. So, which methodology do you follow? I'm going to, as I said, share this. There are two typical methods that people use to answer CR questions. One is they read the argument, they look at the answer choices, they do that back and forth till they reach the final candidate. The second is they read the argument, they pre-think the assumption, and then they go to the answer choices, and then they go back to the argument only if needed. I'm going to put in a poll question here. Which methodology do you follow? 5, 4. I have 90 students here in the webinar. I only have, 36 responses. Come on, I want to see at least 50 responses. Which methodology do you follow? 41, 42, 45, 46. Come on, 4 more. 48, 49. Which methodology do you follow? There's no right or wrong answer. You follow a methodology that's there. Okay, I do need to push people. Only then we get this. We got 53 responses. Let me broadcast results. You can really see 59%, but 60% of you follow methodology 1, which is where you do the back and forth, but 40% of you follow methodology 2. My goal over here is, for those of you who follow methodology 1, this group over here, I want to push you guys towards giving pre-thinking a chance. For those of you who are over here, I want to make sure that I give you the core skills so that you become better pre-thinkers. You get to that 90th percentile group faster. Okay. Now, pre-thinking is a process, and every process is built around certain fundamental skills. And one of the most important fundamental skills or foundational skills that you need on GMAT verbal is the ability to visualize information. And visualizing means imagining stuff in front of you. So that's one skill that we're going to focus on, where we're going to imagine conclusions in our own word, imagine the answer choices in our own words. And as we do that, you're going to see difficult answer choices that are difficult to reject. As you visualize and translate them, you're going to find that they become fairly simple in the context of evaluating them with regards to that argument. Okay. The second thing that we're going to skill that we're going to focus on is building the argument structure, or how does the author arrive at the conclusion, and then we're going to formulate this falsification question, which is the pre-thinking method, right? So with that, let's kind of understand what an assumption is. Why don't you tell me what's an assumption? What's the definition of an assumption? And actually, before that, I'm going to give you a very simple argument because I want to prove to you that all of us are skilled pre-thinkers. If we are able to visualize a scenario, then we can come up with assumptions fairly easily. So here's an argument. Right here, Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, and then the author concludes, therefore, we will not get admission in an Ivy League college. Read the argument and tell me, what does the author assume over here? What's the assumption that the author has over here? I'm going to remove broadcast results, type your answers, press enter, and when I have about 15 answers, I'm going to share broadcast results. So type your answers, press enter, and as you press enter, I will get the response. I'll see it over here, even though you won't see it on your screen. But don't worry about it. The responses, the system is recording your response. All right, I have about 4 answers. but 8 answers. Ten answers. Again, please don't put your answers in the Q&A pod. Put it in the short answer pod, which is on the right-hand side. All right. I'm going to broadcast results. Okay. Okay, so you don't put your answers in the Q&A pod, put them on the right-hand side. So some really good answers. Ivy League scores require score above a score of 500 or score higher than 500. Score of 500 will not get admission in Ivy League college. The requirement for Ivy League is higher than 500. Ivy League's cutoff is more than 500. Okay. Score is great. So many of you've gotten to the crux of the argument. You've really said, hey, you need a score greater than 500 to get into an Ivy League college overall. So how does the author build this argument? The author presents a fact to you. It says Joe scored 500 on the GMAT. Based on that fact, the author makes a claim or makes a prediction saying that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So when he does that, he there's an assumption built in that prediction that a score of 500 for someone like Joe, and that's really important. Why? Because the author says Joe will not get admission. The author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia won't get admission into an Ivy League college, but the author is saying Joe won't get admission. So what he's saying is that score of 500 for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Okay. Some of you, so most of you got this right. A few of you just wrote this statement in your assumption, which again shows that you don't understand the definition of an assumption, but most of you got this right. With that, tell me what is an assumption. What's the formal definition of an assumption? And put that in the short answer part. I'm going to again remove broadcast results. So type it out, press enter, and then once I have about 12 odd responses, I'm going to actually broadcast results. Okay, 4 responses, but 8 responses, 10 responses, 12 responses, 15. Let me broadcast results. Reason to reach conclusion using given information, unstated fact. An assumption could also be an unstated claim, by the way. Something that the author has assumed while arriving at the conclusion. Logical gap filler. Unstated information that supports the conclusion. Anything that must be true. Any new info which must be true. So I have some really good answers, and I have some answers where you show that you kind of understand what an assumption is, but you don't have a precise definition of what an assumption is. Now, I don't like to tell people to write things down, but in this webinar, I'm going to ask you to write 2 things down, just 2 things down in this webinar. And both of those are definitions. One of them is this definition of an assumption. It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid or the conclusion to hold true. Write this down. Why? Because regardless of the difficulty level of question, as long as you understand and apply this definition, you're going to be able to answer every question based on this. So write it down, and then as we solve questions, there will be some answer choices that are a bit more challenging. I'm going to ask you to recite this definition and then evaluate that answer choice. And I'm going to prove it to you. If you can visualize that answer choice and visualize the definition of an assumption, you can either accept that answer choice or reject that answer choice with 100% certainty. Okay, so what it means is that an assumption has 2 characteristics. One is that it provides new information. This means information that you cannot infer from the argument, information that's not given in the argument. And the second is that it satisfies this one criteria, which is must be true. Now, 95% of CR questions attack this part because that's the logical piece. That's the more challenging piece. Pretty much 100% of all hard questions are over here. But 5% of all assumption-based questions attack the new information part. So very few. We're going to see one question which does that. But this is the more challenging aspect of an assumption. Now, the correct choice will do both. It will provide new information and it will also satisfy that must be true criteria. Now, at e-GMAT, we are very, very visual. We love to learn visually. So let's kind of understand this must be true aspect of an assumption. So let's assume this house is an argument, the roof is the conclusion, and you have three supporting statement 1, 2, and 3. Let's call them supporting pillars. And let's number them because it allows us to refer to them. Now let's assume we remove pillar 1, but the roof still stays upright. It doesn't cave in. Since the roof stays upright, the argument's not broken, which means number 1, while it was a strengthener because it supported the roof, it's not an assumption. Let's remove pillar number 3. The roof still stays upright. Again, pillar number 3, while a strengthener, was not an assumption. Let's bring all of these back, and then now let's remove pillar number 2, and the roof caves in. Because the roof caves in, this is what shows that pillar number 2 was a must be true pillar. It was a required pillar, which means it was it was an assumption. Okay, so that's kind of the visual aspect of the assumption. You remove that assumption from the argument, there are ways in which you can break the conclusion. Remember, the roof was our conclusion. Now hold on to that thought for a couple of arguments, and you're going to really see what this visual actually means. Okay, an assumption is also, that's why, called an essential pillar in an argument. So what does that must be true mean? It means that if the information provided by an assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true, or there's a way to break the conclusion without that assumption. In other words, the assumption must be true, like that essential pillar, for the conclusion to remain valid, or for the roof to remain upright. Okay. So what does falsification of conclusion mean? So you're going to take the same argument over here. You have this argument which says Joe won't get admission in an Ivy League college. So in what scenario is this conclusion falsified? The conclusion breaks down if Joe gets admission in an Ivy League college with a score of 500. Okay, so how do we use this information, the must be true aspect, to evaluate whether an answer choice is correct? So let's kind of look at this. I'm going to demonstrate this. Now, on a simple example such as this one, it may seem very trivial and it may seem like, hey, why are we doing this? But once you understand this process, even when questions become super challenging, the process will remain the same and it will perform very, very consistently. So let's evaluate this answer choice and really say, hey, is this a must be true? Or in other words, if this statement is not true, then will my conclusion break down? Or in other words, will Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? So let's see what happens over here. Now, when you say this is not must be true, what you're really saying is that its negated instance becomes true. So which means that if you say this statement is not must be true, what you're saying is this statement is true, which means a score of 500 for someone like Joe is acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, if this statement becomes true, then just does my conclusion break down? Does Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? Absolutely, he does get admission in an Ivy League college, and my conclusion does break down. Okay, why? Because if the score of 500 becomes acceptable, then I, as an author, cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. Okay. Now, a lot of you may be saying, hey, Rajat, how can you say that if a statement is not necessarily true, then its negated instance automatically becomes true? So let's kind of look at this over here. Let's say I make a statement, Harvard has the best MBA program, and you say it's not true. By definition, are you not saying that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or an MBA program which is just as good as Harvard or even better than Harvard exists? Are you not saying that if you said this statement is not true? Yes, no? On the right-hand side, Beatrice, yeah, right? Let's take another example. John runs faster than David. If you say and I say John runs faster than David, and you say that's not true, then by definition, what you're really saying is that David is just as fast as John, or David could even be faster than John, right? So if you say a certain statement is not true, by definition, what you're really saying is its negated version is true. Okay. So this is the must be true aspect. If an answer choice is the correct assumption, then the conclusion will break down in the presence of its negated version. Why? Because when the negated version of the correct answer choice means removing that essential pillar, so the roof will cave in. Okay. If the answer choice is an incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will just keep, nothing will happen to the conclusion in the presence of that negated version of that answer choice. So let's kind of look at that as well. Let's evaluate this answer choice, same argument. A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. We've got to figure out is that must be true. Okay, so let's see what happens if this statement is no longer true, which means a score of 500 on the GMAT is considered a good score. Now, if a score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score, will my conclusion break down? Will Joe get admission? Not really. Why? Because when you look at the argument here, the argument's not predicated on the fact or dependent on the fact as to whether you call the score of 500 a good, a bad, a phenomenal score. The author is simply saying Joe scored a certain number on the GMAT. Based on that number, Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. Or in other words, you replace that 500 by 700, the answer would still remain the same. Okay. Let's evaluate another answer choice and say, is that must be true? Is this the correct assumption? The quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into an Ivy League college. Let's see, is that must be true? So, is this a must be true statement? Is that an assumption? So, what happens when this is not true? Which means its negated version becomes true, which means the quality of the applicant's essay starts to play a significant role. Now, if that happens, will Joe get admission in an Ivy League college? The answer is no. If Joe doesn't get the bare minimum score that needed for the GMAT, then that quality of essays, doesn't even start to come into play, even though it may play a significant role, but you've got to get the minimum threshold on the GMAT. Okay. Again, many of you may be wondering how are we going to use this as arguments become more complex. You're going to see how we're going to use this. The three skills that we're going to focus on in this webinar: the ability to visualize information, building that argument structure, and formulating the falsification question. Every question that we do, we're going to focus on building these three skills. Okay. As you build your understanding of must be true, you're going to be able to get better at this. For the correct option, you're going to really see how the conclusion breaks down. For the incorrect option, you're going to really see how the conclusion just stays like that. And one of the notions that you're going to experience in this webinar is that there are no close answer choices in CR. Every answer choice is either absolutely correct or absolutely wrong. Okay. With that, let's do a pre-thinking exercise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an argument, a pure argument, no answer choices. I'm going to give you 2.5 minutes on that argument. I want you to tell me what does the author assume there. So make sure you get a pen and paper ready. Okay, because I'm going to give you this argument. I'm going to give you these 2 minutes, and then we're going to look at how I go about pre-thinking in this argument. Okay, get a pen. Do you have your pen and paper ready? Yes, no? Glass of water needed. All right. Here is the argument. I'm going to mute myself. You can put your answers in here. Again, I've removed broadcast results. So type your answers in, press enter. I'll get the response. And then when I get after about 2 minutes, I'm going to broadcast the results. All right, guys, another 20 seconds. Get your answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. Broadcast results. Okay, let's look at the answers. Beatrice, if you can post your answer on the right-hand side, not in the Q&A pod, that'd be good. Research gives more reward. Research is directly proportional to rewards. Okay. Tenured professors do more research than full-time lecturers. All right, interesting. The reward system affects teaching of a professor. All right. Okay, that's a good response. Due to research, tenured professors, they end up teaching better. All right, or I think the answer should have been, if you're thinking in that direction, research makes a better professors better teachers, or worse teachers is what it should be rather than better, because that's kind of what we're talking about. Assumes that both categories get equal opportunity. All right, that's a reasonable response. Reward system will motivate tenured professors to enhance student learning. Okay. So a variety of responses here. There's some which are good, there are some which are promising, and there are others that are completely off topic. And when I look at responses, what I'm looking for is, were you able to get to the crux of the argument? Were you able to build somewhat of a logical structure of the argument? Were you able to visualize that logical structure? Because at this point, if you're able to do that, then as I present the framework, you're going to be able to follow that framework. In other words, if your energy is being channelized and it's already being moving in the right direction, then with the framework, it's going to be channelized really properly. You're going to see an amazing improvement in the outcomes. Now, if your energy is not being channelized, then what's going to happen in this webinar is you're going to see your energy more and more moving in the right direction. You may not be able to get more answers right by the end of this webinar, but you'll definitely be more comfortable as you read the arguments. And then after putting in about a couple of days of effort, or about 8 hours of effort, you're going to find that your hit rate improves tremendously. Okay. So different people will see different benefits from this webinar, immediate benefits. But again, that's because you are at a different level right now. Okay. So how will we approach this? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to isolate the conclusion. And you're going to know who you are, which group you fall in, as I ask some leading questions. Okay. We're going to isolate the conclusion. We're going to understand what that conclusion is, and how does the author arrive at the conclusion, and then we'll ask a few pre-thinking questions. As I ask those questions, assumptions would jump right at you, and that's the beauty of pre-thinking. If you build the logical structure right, if you've understood the argument, pre-thinking is a very, very simple step. You're not going to make a mistake in pre-thinking. 99 out of 100 times when someone tells me that they're not able to pre-think, the cause is in their ability to understand the argument, not the fact that they're building the pre-thinking question wrong, because the pre-thinking question is a fairly simple question. Okay, so e-GMATers who've been following pre-thinking, this is your cue. Follow this, and as you solve more and more arguments in this webinar, figure out which aspects of the argument did you fail to understand, because of which you struggled while doing pre-thinking. Okay. Now, pre-thinking, the falsification method or the pre-thinking question, stems from the very definition of what an assumption is. An assumption is an unstated idea that it must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which means that without an assumption, your conclusion will break down. In other words, if you visualize the same house with where the conclusion was the roof, and if you were to build a house like that, and if you had to figure out, hey, where should I put pillars? Figure out where your roof is caving in and put essential pillars over there. Or in other words, an assumption is built around scenarios where the conclusion breaks down. So if you have to figure out what an assumption is, look at the argument, try and break it. Figure out the scenarios in which the conclusion no longer holds true. Your assumptions are going to be that such scenarios are not possible in the context of this argument. Does that make sense? Look at an argument, try and break the conclusion, figure out the scenarios that break the conclusion. Your assumption is, hey, such a scenario is not possible. Why? Because it's the very definition of an assumption. It stems from the definition. It's not rocket science. Okay. So your pre-thinking question, regardless of the argument, will remain this. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? That's the second thing that I'm going to ask you to write down. Why? Because we're going to use it again and again in this argument. The question will remain the same. These are the two things that we're going to fill in the blank based on each argument: the conclusion breakdown criteria and the facts given in the argument. Okay. With me so far? Does it make sense even if you can't really foresee that? How will you apply this? Logically, does it make sense? Okay. All right. Here is the conclusion. Here's the argument. Let's take the first step. Let's figure out which statement is the main conclusion. So I'm going to give you a poll over here. I want you to tell me which statement is the main conclusion. Here, I've divided the argument into 3 different statements. Tell me which statement is the main conclusion. I have about 84 students here. I have about 25, 27. Let's get to at least 50 responses, guys. Which statement is the main conclusion? 35. 40 responses. Let's get to 10 more responses. 47, 49, 52. All right. And guys, because you are here, participate. Why? Because even when you make a mistake, you get feedback on where you need to put effort in, and that way you become better. And trust me, it's a lot better to make a mistake here or get things right over here, one way or the other, than to do this on the test, because no one's judging you here. No one knows your name here. No one can see you. All right. Let me end the poll, broadcast results. You can see half the people chose statement 2, which is the correct answer. 27% of you chose statement 1, and then 22% of you chose statement 3. Now, so statement 2 is the correct answer. This is what the author wants. So the main conclusion in any argument is what the author wants you to believe. It's the reason why the author has written this argument, and the main conclusion is always by the author of the argument. Okay, when you read this argument, you can clearly see that statement number 2 is why the author has written this argument, to make this point that the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system of the former. Okay. Now, let's talk about each of these other segments: people who chose statement 1 and people who chose statement 3. A lot of people see the word concludes and they think, oh, this has to be the main conclusion because it has the word concludes. Now, the problem is this conclusion is made by this research paper, not by the author of the argument. Remember, the main conclusion in any argument is by the author of the argument. Okay. People who chose statement 1, was this the reason why you chose statement 1? Because you saw the word concludes? Make clear the prior answers. Was this the reason? Okay. Statement 1 is a fact. All right. It's not a claim. A conclusion is always a claim or an opinion. Okay. Now, a lot of people chose statement 3 as well. And statement 3 versus statement 2, I understand it can get confusing. Now, whenever you have 2 statements that are linked together, the way statement 2 and 3 are, you have to figure out, why is that statement written? Is 2 written to make 3 more believable, or is 3 written to make 2 more believable? And when you look at and evaluate these 2 statements, what you're going to find is 3 is written to make 2 more believable. The reason why statement 3 is put in place over here is to make sure that we support statement number 2, which means 3 is a supporting statement, 2 is your main conclusion. Or in other words, 3 is a premise which supports the main conclusion, which is statement number 2. People who chose statement number 3, is that clear? Can you see the criterion for rewarding tenured faculty places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching? That's written to support statement number 2, which is the difference has to do with the reward system. But the person who says no, please put in your doubt in the Q&A pod. Should we use therefore test? You can use ABC test, absolutely. Okay. Now, I want to ask this other question, and it's really important. Can I repeat? Yes. So, if 3, let me actually put something which is very, very simple. I think it becomes a lot easier. I'm going to put in one statement. So I'm going to highlight 2 parts of this. By Google is the first part, and this one is the second part. Let's put this in blue. So the blue part or the black part, which one's the main conclusion? And which one's the supporting statement? So black is the main conclusion, and blue, okay? Is that clear to everyone? Blue is the premise. By Google is the conclusion. So essentially, that's the same test that you're doing over here, where what you're really saying is statement number 3 is written to make 2 more believable. Here, it is expected to declare excellent earnings. That was written to make by Google more believable, which is why by Google became the main conclusion, and it is expected to declare excellent earnings became your premise. Okay. Is that clear? So someone asked this question. So the only difference between a premise and an assumption is that a premise is stated and an assumption is not stated in the argument. Okay. Good point. Not quite right. Okay. The difference between a strengthener and a premise is what he exactly stated that. So every assumption will support the conclusion, and every assumption, of course, is not stated. That's why it's an assumption. But then an assumption also satisfies this special criteria called must be true. A premise is simply a statement that supports the conclusion. Again, go back to that visual. A roof with pillars. All the 3 pillars were premises. Only pillar number 2 was your assumption. Okay. All right. Now, I want to ask another question over here. Let me just move the short answer pod. And this is where the focus is really important while reading. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? There is a poll question here. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Is it just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both, or neither? This time we're just focusing on statement number 3. Again, 50 responses. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? You can read statement 3 again. I have 30 responses, 33, 35, 45, 48, 49. All right. I have more than 50 responses. I'm going to end the poll, broadcast the results. I have segments of people here. There's one segment that gets me to 25. Then, there's some resistance there. then people get to 35 very quickly, then there's the resistance, then 44, then suddenly I see the jump to 55, 56. It's just, I think, people who really just either take a certain amount of time or need a certain amount of persuasion. Okay, so you can really see just tenured faculty 80%, that you're absolutely right. But then you also see the 16% which are saying who say essentially both tenured faculty and lecturer. And you guys are wrong over here. Read this. The criteria for rewarding tenured faculty typically places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. So we're only certain about tenured faculty here, and this greater is a comparative emphasis on research than on teaching. What they're really saying is maybe there's 70% of the rewards reserved for research, 30% for teaching. That's what greater means. Okay, we don't know anything about the reward system for lecturers based on statement number 3, or in this entire argument, by the way. Is that clear? Now, can you really see? We're just talking about the understanding aspect of the argument and why it's really important to spend time on understanding the argument so that you don't make mistakes. If you don't understand the argument, then there's no way you'd be able to figure out the assumption, or we have a good basis to evaluate answer choices. So really focus on building the core skills needed to understand the assumption. Okay. So let's visualize the conclusion. And I think one of the most important things that to recognize is the author is not disputing the findings of that research report. He's actually embracing it. He's really explaining why the data exists in the first place. He's saying, hey, let's blame the reward system for professors for this. Okay. What he's really saying is, hey, tenured faculty maybe provide significant benefit to 40% of the professors. Full-time lecturers do that to 70% of the professors. And the reason is the reward system for this group of people. That's all that he's saying. Okay, so let's build the structure for this argument. This is your main conclusion. This is the supporting statement. This statement provides the context, and the context is really important because it gives you a sense of what the argument's about. Without the context, the argument would be incomplete. Okay, so remember the pre-thinking question: under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Again, it has two fill in the blanks, 1 and 2, and we're going to translate each one of them. Okay, so let's do that. Remember, this is 1 and this is 2. So let's do 2. Under what circumstances, given the facts of the argument, will the conclusion break down? So what happens when the conclusion breaks down? We cannot blame the reward system. So this is the translation of 2 over here. Can you see that? How, when we make this statement, under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible for the difference in performance? We are essentially saying, under what circumstances will the conclusion break down? That's the conclusion breakdown criteria, when you can't blame the reward system. Remember, the findings of the paper still need to remain true because that's a fact which is given in the argument. Given that full-time lecturers enhance students' learning more than professors do, and given that reward system for professors places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. Again, this is 1. This is the translation of 1. This is 2. Conclusion breakdown. And this is the translation of 2. Look at this. Does this make sense? Conclusion breakdown means you can't blame the reward system. And facts in the argument, data that's given in the argument. Full-time lecturers do a better job than professors. Professors' reward system has a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. That's the crux of the argument. I want to see more yeses, guys. Come on. Okay. So let's ask this question. Under what circumstances can you not blame the reward system? What if non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system? Can you blame the reward system? If non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system? No, you can't blame the reward system then. What if there's if there's a survey done and most professors say, hey, we understand there's a reward system that exists, but we don't care about it. If they don't act as per the reward system, then can you blame the reward system? No, you can't blame the reward system. Okay. So in both these scenarios, my conclusion breaks down, my roof caves in. So what are my assumptions? That these scenarios don't exist. Non-tenured professors should not have an identical reward system, and most tenured professors should care about the reward system. Okay, those are my assumptions. Now, can you really see that in many ways these are different from the ones that you wrote down? Can you see that? Can you also see that, because we went step by step, it's not a big leap to really able to come up with these assumptions. As long as you understand the conclusion, as long as you build that logical structure and formulate that falsification question, you'd be able to figure these out. And not just these, there are other assumptions that exist within this argument as well. You'd be able to figure those out as well. So it's a very, very logical approach towards towards answering CR questions. I've had some students a few years back who now graduated from their MBA, and then they come back to me, and what they really say is, Rajat, we learned pre-thinking in CR. In many ways, when we actually work with clients, so these are people who are either at McKinsey or Booz Allen. What they really say is that, hey, the method of pre-thinking is what we apply when we do case studies as well, or when we build presentations, and that's something that you should definitely tell students, that when people prepare for the case interviews, this method is going to help them extract more from the cases given to them. Okay. Now, how many of you are concerned about timing and saying, man, this looks good, it's logical, there are no tricks in it, but it seems to take really long. This is really, really long. Will I have the time on the test to be able to do? Okay. Now, facts. This is something you can verify, and this won't be true if this method didn't work. How many of you subscribed to our YouTube channel? Not me. Okay, let's just look at how many of you have. Now, if you go to our YouTube channel, one thing that you'd notice is, for the last 5 years, we are the only company that's been posting success regularly. Okay, we have upwards of 350 success stories. Most companies don't even have 100. And trust me, there are many more that we haven't published, just because otherwise it's publishing too much success. Also, similarly, if you go to GMAT Club, we wouldn't have accounted for 60% of all 700 plus scores if these methods did not work. And in the other 40%, you pretty much every other partner over there. Okay. We have upwards of 2,000 5-star reviews now. We won't even get those. So these methods work. At the same time, what you feel is also right. Why? Because for those of you, has anyone practiced pre-thinking so far? e-GMATers, you would have practiced. If you're e-GMATer, you would have practiced pre-thinking. Does the time to answer questions go up? Does the time to answer questions go up when you practice pre-thinking? At the start, absolutely. Kind of. It will go up. Okay? This is how you're going to feel. This is the person who's not started pre-thinking. You have an accuracy chart over here and the time to answer question over here. So the higher you go, the better you get at answering questions. The more towards the right you go, the longer you spend on a question. When you start doing pre-thinking, you go from 1 to 2. You get your hit rate improves, but your time to answer questions goes up as well. And you might even take 5 minutes to answer questions. At this point, you'd be like this guy saying, why the hell am I doing this? It's making me slower. How many of you felt that? And some of you are really saying it takes time to pre-thinking, but I don't have to read the passage twice now. It's incredible that as one of the outputs of this. But how many of you felt like this guy saying, why the hell am I doing this? I already worry about it. And the timing actually decreases significantly, not increases, but decreases significantly with practice. So this is going to happen. And this is a symptom of the fact that you are building new connections in your brain. You're learning new skills. Has anyone learned something new in the past 5 years? Have you learned anything new? What happens when you learn something new using the right approach? Whether you're talking about a sport or something in music or just you have a learning curve. And one of the first things is when you're learning things step by step, you're going to take longer to do the step. I started learning squash, and as I learned, there's a shot called the boast, where um, you're hitting the ball on the wall and then on the front wall, on the side wall and on the front wall, and when I started doing it right, when my feet position was right, the initial balls that my squash coach had to throw at me had to be slower because I had to do everything right. But then within a few days, I got much better. Okay. It's a symptom. If you take longer, it's a symptom of learning things right. At the same time, your hit rate needs to be higher as well. Both of these things need to happen. Now, if you continue persisting with pre-thinking, what's going to happen is every time you read an argument, your brain's going to formulate new connections. You're going to visualize better, and after about 10 to 20 arguments, depending on um, what your starting point is, you're going to find that information repeats. You're going to find that, hey, visualizing information becomes a lot faster, and you're able to pre-think a lot better, and which is where you start to go from that 2 to 3. Now remember, as you're going from 2 to 3, you're going higher, which means your hit rate's going up, but you're also moving towards the left, which means your time to answer questions is less than what it was when you started. This is what I call as the pre-thinking hysteresis. For those of you who are engineers, you probably understand what that is. And at this point, you're going to answer every question using pre-thinking. And as you get better at it, your hit rate's going to continue to improve, and you're going to continue to get faster and faster. Okay. This is the journey you're going to take. And it's this hump that is something that um, that you've got to overcome if you want to deserve that 90th percentile ability. Questions on this, or does that make you feel good? Does that make you feel better? And feeling good is something which I think is something that I shouldn't ask for. But does that make you feel better, knowing this journey? Optimistic. Okay. Again, this isn't rocket science. All right. So you will get there. And you're not alone. If you go to our YouTube channel, you watch those videos, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of people talk about this. Okay. So here's one student who said, understand the passage completely, take your time, equally important, pre-think and answer before looking at an answer choice. This one word will have the most impact on your GMAT score. Here's a guy who improved, I think, from a 35th percentile to a 97th percentile in CR, just because he started doing breathing. His CR, his RC was set, his SC was at 65th percentile. That improved to 93rd percentile as well. Again, all within 20 days, just because we tweaked that process. And he says, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. When it gets to 700 level questions, you have to do pre-thinking. Why? Because it helps narrows your focus on the logic so that you don't deviate from the key argument when trap or out of scope answer choices come. When he says the key argument, what he's talking about is the logical structure of the argument. There is a question. It says there may be many different assumptions. It will be difficult to pre-think every assumption. When you are making that, when you're asking that question, you're not talking about pre-thinking an argument. You're talking about predicting the answer. Is the goal of pre-thinking predicting the answer? Is the goal? Not really. The goal of pre-thinking is to ensure that you understand the logical structure so that when trap or out of scope answer choices come in, as is written over here, that you don't deviate from what the argument's all about. Okay. We have another, Alvin's asking what time will the session end? Another 50 minutes before the session ends. Okay. Here's a guy who went from 520 to 740. It's a 220-point improvement. It says pre-thinking primes the mind, and we are constantly on our toes while reading an argument or an RC paragraph. And again, pre-thinking really useful in RC as well. Okay. Again, this is how you will feel overall. With that, we're going to take another example. This is a phenomenal example of what must be true really is. So I'm going to share the poll question with you so that you guys can put your answers in. Okay. This argument seems very simple, but then the answer choices have lots and lots of strengtheners. So they seem very confusing. So with that, here is your argument. I'm going to mute myself. Good luck, guys. Another 20 seconds, get those answers in. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. Come on, last chance. And broadcast the results. Here's how you guys poll. Choice E is the most popular choice, but you can really see choices B, C, and D are also reasonably popular overall, as is choice A. I mean, 8% of you or 4 of you chose choice A. We got about 50 responses. So that was interesting. Okay. So let's see what's going on over here. So we want to finance road repairs, and the Highway Commission in a certain state, it's considering a toll increase. And how much increase? A 50% increase on the current toll rate, which is 10 cents per mile. And the commissioner makes a claim saying that, hey, as we increase the toll, we're going to increase the revenue generated by toll by at least 50% every year. And that's something which is given to us. And then you have the question, which is that what's the assumption on which highway commissioners claim depends. So what's the claim? The revenue will go up by about 50% every year. Okay. So I'm going to hide this, bring in my short answer poll here. All right. So let's visualize this conclusion. So what the conclusion is saying is that the revenue generated will go up by 50%, which means that last year, LY, if last year the revenue was $1 million, then this year, TY, is going to be at least 1.5. So I can say 1.6 million. That's something that I always like to put numbers there. It helps me visualize information overall. Now, how do we estimate annual revenue based on the information given in the argument? What's the logic over there? How do we estimate annual revenue? You have the argument here. Guys, can you hear me? All right, annual revenues, distance travel times price per mile. Okay. Annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles. Okay. Everyone's clear on this? This makes sense. Toll per mile multiplied by toll per mile, total number of miles. Where do we get this from? This is 10 cents per mile. So it's toll per mile multiplied by how many miles do we travel. Okay. So let's kind of ask the same question. Remember, this is our falsification question, which is under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Okay. What we know is that we're gonna increase this by 50%. So we're gonna have plus 50% over here. So in what circumstances will this not go up by 50%? In what circumstances will that not go up? The only scenario is if this entity over here, this goes down. Okay. That's the only scenario when this won't go up by 50%, which means my assumption is the total number of miles driven does not decrease. Is the pre-thinking clear? Okay. Ujola, is that clear to you? Okay, no one calls me sir. Everyone calls me Rajat. Okay, no one calls Payal ma'am. Now, let's look at the poll responses here. I'm going to start with choice B. Okay, 25% of you chose choice B. How many of you were confused with choice B? The correct answer is E. We will talk about E. But how many of you were confused and felt, hey man, choice B is really tempting? Okay, yes, at first. So as I said, this question is a really good question if you want to improve on your understanding of must be true. Choice B says the total number of trips made on toll highway per year will not decrease from its current level. Now, one of the first things that you have to do when you read an answer choice, and especially if it's a confusing answer choice, is understand what this answer choice is saying. Okay, so if last year we made 1,000 trips, so what this is saying is this year we will have at least 1,000 trips. 900 is not a possibility. 990 is not a possibility. Now, is that a must be true? Okay. What happens if the number of trips instead of 1,000 goes down to 990? Does it mean that the total number of miles traveled on the highway will go down? No. What can compensate for fewer trips? What can compensate for fewer trips? Longer trips. Yes. Average distance traveled. Absolutely. Created average distance traveled. Okay. So is this a must be true? No. So choice B, while a great strengthener, is not a must be true. Okay. Again, this is the importance of understanding what must be true is. Is it absolutely essential for the conclusion to hold true? Okay. Let's look at choice E. Choice E talks about total distance in line with our pre-thinking. Okay. And is the correct answer. Let's look at choice C. Average length of the trip will not decrease. Okay. What can compensate for shorter trips? So last time the average length was 10 miles. What this is saying is this time it won't be 9.5. This is not possible. Yes, more trips. Remember, total distance is a product of number of trips times average length of trip. If one goes down, the other can compensate. So, either one of them is not must be true. People who chose choice C or choice B, is that clear? Okay. Choice A. Choice A is completely irrelevant to the claim. Remember, the claim is not that the annual revenue will be enough to finance road repairs. The claim is simply that the annual revenue will go up by at least 50% per year. All right. So, what did you learn from this question? What is the takeaway for those of you who made a mistake? And in fact, even those of you who got it right. Visualization, okay. What should you have visualized? Understand the logic, the revenue, okay. And you can really see if you visualize the argument, pre-thinking is very, very simple. Where you fail is A, either visualizing the argument, or B, connecting the facts from the argument, which means that you may visualize the statements individually, but you probably don't connect them. Breaking the conclusion is important, absolutely. Okay, now interpretation of context by connecting different parts of the argument. That's good. And this is, really, really good. So for different people, the takeaways may be different. And recognizing what is the primary reason that you made a mistake is really important. Your takeaway need not be the same as that of the next person, and which is the beauty of having 100 people in a session such as this one. Okay. Now we're going to do a question on two-part analysis. Let me put in a yes/no poll here. How many of you have studied TPA? How many of you have studied TPA? Uh, all right, but 15% of you have studied TPA. Now, this question is very much linked to CR skills. So even if you've not studied TPA, you're going to find that that the concepts tested and the application is very similar to what you do in CR. At the same time, the format of the question it's going to be slightly unfamiliar. Okay, so let me go over here. Here is the question. So what's happening in this question is that you're given an argument over here. Okay. And the question seems really, really interesting. It says identify an assumption required by the journalist's argument and a fact. So this part's fairly standard. So the first part's identify an assumption. The second is and a fact that, if true, would most strongly support the assumption. So in other words, that fact would strengthen not the main conclusion directly, but the assumption that you've chosen. And essentially, you have to make one conclusion over here and one selection over here and one selection over here. Do you want to give this a try? Okay. So try this out. So you have 6 answer choices here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the answer choices here. So remember, you have to identify an assumption and a fact that supports that assumption. So I have the same 6 statements over here. And in this poll, the first poll that you see on the top, I want you to identify the assumption. Can you see the 6 statements? Okay. All right, last 15 seconds, get those answers in. Which statement is an assumption? Five, four, three, two, and one. Okay, so I'm gonna end the poll. Now, I'm gonna now put in another poll over here. I'm gonna actually put this poll at the bottom, so you guys have this here. You guys know which statement you chose as an assumption. You can also scroll down. Then I'm going to put in another poll over here when I want you to tell me which of these strengthen the assumption. So here is the next poll here. So which of these strengthens the assumption? Get those answers in. Three, two, and one. I saw lots and lots of people changing their answers. So here's how you guys polled. So strength assumption, first of all. This is how you polled. Choice C or number 3, whatever we may call it, is really popular, as is choice E or number 6, or choice F or number 6. So these are two of the more popular choices. And then in terms of strengtheners, choice E is the most popular, then followed by choice choice F is the most popular. Choice number 6 is the most popular. Let's call it this way, followed by choice number 3 and choice number 4. Choice number actually 5 was also really, really popular. All right, so let's kind of solve this. But before that, how did this question feel? How did this question feel? Interesting. Felt fine, hard, confusing. It is hard. It's a hard question. Every question that we've done in this session is a 700 level question. Let me be very clear. Okay. So it is difficult. It does need pre-thinking. And it's interesting as well. Every hard question is also interesting. Okay. And confusing. So let's kind of look at this. So let's visualize the conclusion. So everyone's clear that the strike is inevitable as the conclusion. That's what the journalist is saying. Is that clear to everyone? And what this means is that what the journalist is saying is no matter what happens, given the demand, which means the workers' demands, and the situation, the strike will take place. There is no way to avoid the strike. That's kind of what inevitable means. This is the way we are. It's kind of a hopeless situation right now. Okay. So let's understand the structure of the argument. So what's going on over here is there are two demands which are there. One is the pay increase in that lunch slot, and then the second demand is to rehire some workers. Um, and then you have Paxum's financial situation. Both of these leads has led the journalists to believe that the demand, the strike is inevitable. So the strike's going to happen. Okay. And when you think about this, you're going to ask the pre-thinking question, the same question: under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? In other words, is there a scenario in which we can prevent the strike, given that the fact that we have these demands of workers, and given the fact that Paxum has 3/4 in the last 4 quarters, 3/4 of losses and 1/4 of profit. So, is there a way to prevent the strike? How can we prevent the strike? Only when the income looks good. Absolutely, that's a good answer. Okay, the way to prevent the strike is, if somehow they can get enough money, and that's a good way to really say if the income looks good. All right. Or, so if you really just say that, hey, if the falsification scenarios is that Paxum can get enough money to satisfy the demands. That's a way to avoid the strike. Everyone's clear about this? If this happens, then we can avoid the strike, right? This means the assumption is that there's no way they can get enough money. Another thing is also there is that despite the threats, the workers don't proceed with their demands. Okay. Don't proceed with the strike. Again, the same thing. The essence of this is, and that's a good question. The essence of this is, there's enough money and there's enough leeway to satisfy the demands. Okay. The money part comes from the demands as well. But the money part is the big piece, is kind of emphasizing the argument 3 of the last 4 quarters had losses. Okay. Um, okay. So there are two fundamental assumptions here. One is, hey, they will go on a strike if the demand's not well. And the, it's always money. Demand too doesn't depend on money. It doesn't depend on them giving money, but it invariably, if you have a longer lunch break, then you definitely do lose making money. Okay. Coming back to this falsification scenario 1 and 2 and the corresponding assumptions. Do they make sense? Few more yeses. Again, the same CR process that we've gone through. Gone through the process of pre-thinking. I'm going through it slightly faster because we've gone through 2 or 3 iterations of it right now. Okay. So for each one of these pre-thinking, we have to do an additional step. So if we have this assumption over here, then we have to figure out the strengtheners for that assumption. Remember, the strengtheners are not for the argument, but for the assumption. So if the assumption is that Faxam does not have enough money or cannot get enough money, then some of the strengtheners could be, okay, where we say, hey, the cash reserves are mostly gone because of the losses, banks are unwilling to pay them, and it barely has enough money to meet its current operating costs. All of these will strengthen this notion. Okay. Everyone's there with me? Okay. And the strengtheners for this would be that they have a history of going up, following up with their threats. If they give a threat, they're going to go on a strike. All right. Another thing that would strengthen the notion is despite going on a strike, they'd still get paid. That's what the law states. Okay. So let's look at answer choices, and I'm going to share what you guys chose over here. And we're going to focus just on the assumption piece here. Very few people chose this over here as an assumption. Now remember, an assumption is a must-be true statement. Choice A says the workers would likely be willing to compromise on them with respect to paid lunch. So let's say they'll be willing to compromise on one of their demands. Okay, one aspect of their demands. Okay. Now this actually makes a strike less likely. Now, in some ways, what does this do? It negates my conclusion. It actually weakens the conclusion. So this cannot be an assumption. An assumption has to strengthen. It has to actually increase your belief in the conclusion. But this reduces your belief in the conclusion. So this can't be an assumption. Okay. Choice B says when the leaders call for a strike, the members inevitably vote to go on a strike, which means that it's just about, hey, if the leaders really say the strike happens. Now, we don't have any information about what the leaders are saying in this argument. And so, we can't really say anything about whether it's an assumption or strengthener, given the information in the argument. Choice C, really, really tempting. Lots and lots of people chose choice C. And what choice C is saying is Faxam is unwilling to negotiate. Okay. Willingness, what does that mean? A lot of people think if you're unwilling to do something, this means you won't do it. Is that true? No. How many of you want to take the test? If you could get admission just purely based on your credentials, yeah, means even if they could, they wouldn't want to do it. Wouldn't want to do it. But bottom line is, and this is really, really tempting. Okay. But is that must be true? Don't we do things despite our willingness? And this is a really classic trap answer choice. The word willing, the word prefer is used in assumption choices because people think that preference or assumption means that they're not going to act on it. Let me ask this. How many of you would prefer to be in a session on your Saturday morning or a Saturday evening studying for CR? How many of you would you prefer to do this? You would prefer to do this over playing and over going to the gym and over enjoying? No, most of us won't. Okay, unless and until you have love for critical reasoning, you're doing this to meet an objective. Right? So preferences, willingness doesn't mean inaction. Okay. It purely means resistance. Remember this. Okay. So is that an assumption? Is that a must be true? No. Should Faxon be willing to negotiate? Or would they want to negotiate with this? Absolutely not. Why? Because they still have to negotiate even if they don't want to. Okay. People who chose choice C, is that clear? Why it's not an assumption? Okay. Choice D talks about why the losses were, and it says, hey, it happened because of decline in profit margins. Okay. Okay. And what this means, what this is saying, and this is really important to understand the context of this, is that hey, these losses are something that's been happening and it's going to continue to happen, and it's not because of a lawsuit that they got or a one-time reason where they had to make a big purchase. That's not going to continue, but it's operation. It seems like operational losses overall, and so is that something that's a must be true? Is it required that these losses uh, be because of profit margins for them not to negotiate? No, the answer is no, not really. Um, okay, so that's something which is there. It does seem like a tempting piece to strengthen my conclusion, but it definitely is not an assumption. So I'm going to park it. I'm going to definitely say no to assumption, but strengthener absolutely. I'm not going to go towards choice E. Okay. Choice E really just says that the 12 laid off employees, actually, 5 of you chose choice E. I did not expect people to choose choice E. The 12 laid off employees were not laid off for any performance related reasons. So a lot of people said, hey, this has to be true because if they were related for performance related reasons, if they laid off for performance related reasons, then Foxham may not hire them. Again, is that a must be true? No, not really. They might still hire them. If that's a precondition overall. Okay. Not every employee is probably performing at, and not every employee performs at 100%. Let's look at choice F, which is an interesting assumption over here. Choice F says Faxam does not have sufficient cash or cash reserves to support the increased expenses. Again, what it's saying is they cannot meet the demand even if they wanted to, which again is in line with what we said, that even if they go to a bank, they won't be able to get enough money. So even if they want to go on the negotiation table, they can't meet the demands. They don't have the resources to meet the demands, and that definitely seems like an assumption that we came up with during our pre-thinking. Okay. Now, what's a strengthener out of this? So we found the assumption of which of these assumptions, which of these statements strengthens that assumption, which means it gives us a reason to believe in this. Okay, this is my assumption. Okay, which of these statements over here gives us a reason to believe that Faxam does not have sufficient cash flow? And if you were to really just say, yeah, increased expenses, good doubt. And the answer is, so please put in your doubt about increased expenses. How are the expenses increased? Can someone answer that? How are the expenses increased? What would lead to an increase in expenses? No, what would lead to? If they increase the cost, if they hire those people, if they give the salary increase, and if they do the paid lunch. Basically, all the demands, every demand, if they accept it. What it's saying is, even if they want to accept the demand, they can't do it. They don't have the cash flow. One of the first things that you're going to learn in an MBA is that running a business, and I learned when I did my MBA, is that entrepreneurship is positive cash flow. Without cash, you go illiquid, and when you go illiquid, that's when you file bankruptcy. Okay. Now, what supports this? That they will likely not have sufficient cash flow if the majority of losses were due to decline in profit margins. Okay, this doesn't support this. This doesn't support this. The willingness to negotiate doesn't support this. This doesn't support this. Okay, this supports that why they won't have negative cash flow because of the why they won't have enough cash flow because of the decline in profit margins. Now, how many of you got both the options right? How many of you got both the options right? If you got both the options right, congratulations. If you're able to come up with an assumption properly, congratulations. If you chose choice 3 or choice 6, okay, then figure out, you were thinking in the right direction, figure out why you made a mistake. Okay, but again, there's a lot of learning that's there. You got the strength and right, that is good. Are we assuming that FactSum will not cut any other expenses? When you really say it does not have sufficient cash flow, this is a piece of information that's given to you over here. That's something that you have to remember. Okay, this means that you're being told that they cannot generate enough cash to meet these increased expenses. You cannot come up with other options to really say, what if you cut expenses here? What if you cut expenses there? Okay, it's very, very similar to in the context of CR. If your boss really says that, hey, you have $5 million to invest, and you've got to build a business that built on that based on that investment provides an internal rate of return of about 25%. And you can't come back to him saying, hey, maybe I can't do it in 5 million, maybe I can do it in 7 million. In the context of CR, you can't do that. You've got to live within the constraints of the argument. And that's really, really important here. But why 12 laid off employees is kind of ignored here? It's not. It's baked into this cash piece here. It's just not explicitly mentioned. Neither is the 5% increase in wages. Neither is the fact that paid lunch. It's the fact that all of these lead to them increased cash requirements. That's all baked in. Okay. What did you learn from this? And then I'm going to talk about the takeaways. What did you learn from this question? What are your takeaways? Money is important. Money is always important. TPAs are really, this is a super difficult takeaway. TPA, they're not really, really difficult, but yeah, read clearly. You need to visualize and pre-think before choosing the answers. Absolutely. That the same skills, the same core skills, the ability to visualize, the ability to pre-think, that's something that's tested in DI as well. It's also tested in MSR. Really need to understand the complete picture. Okay. Now, can you also see at the same time that this question's really practical? The scenario is really, really practical. Okay. And that's what a lot of DI is as well. It's very, very practical. Okay. Now, Also, something which is very critical is when you go to DI, do it only after either you finish the quant and verbal aspects of your preparation, or if you already have an innate high ability in quant or verbal. So my threshold over here is 70th percentile. If you can hit 70th percentile in both quant and verbal, then you can go to DI, not before that. Your core skills remain the same. It's just a higher level application of those core skills. And if you're an e-GMAT, you have the world's most comprehensive um, course for GMAT Focus Edition, and way more comprehensive and way more detailed than what you'd get with the official guide. Okay, so just make sure you stay true to it. Yeah, don't start both quant and verbal together. Just do one at a time. With that, we're going to do one other question, and this is a really wonderful question. It has a beautiful application of visualization. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a poll question, and we're going to spend about 3 minutes doing this. 3 minutes. You're going to spend 3 minutes solving this. But before we do that, I want you to click on. I want 30 people to click on not answer. That way, you guys would time yourself. The answer was F and D, correct, or 6 and 4. 30 people not answered. Come on, guys. I only have 20 people who've said not answered. I need 30 people to say not answered before I show the question. 23, 22, about 24. Let's just go with 24 since it's getting late. Here is the question. Good luck, guys. All right, about 80% of the group is done. Get those answers in. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Come on, I have just 2 people who are stuck. 1 person who's not answered. 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. Broadcast the results. That's how you guys did. And this is a 700 level question. Half the class got it right. The usual accuracy on this question is about 35%. So good job as a group. You guys did better than average. So that's good. But let's kind of understand the core skill. I want to make sure we understand why we get this question. Right, we understand the visualization aspect of it, because despite getting this question, a lot of people don't understand this. In fact, if you go to GMAT Club, you're going to see about 4 pages of discussion on this question. Okay, which if you visualize, the discussion is immaterial. Right, so we're going to address both B and D. Don't worry, we're going to address every answer choice, and in fact, in about 4 minutes, you would not be confused with B. Okay, so what's going on in this question? So last year, we collected a bunch of garbage. We did not burn anything. We did not recycle anything. My apologies. We burned everything. We incinerated everything. Incineration means burning. So let's kind of take a look at this part over here. Now I couldn't get a good icon for a truck, so I got a trash can. And so how many trash cans do you see here, or how many trucks do you see here? How many trash cans, which is truck equivalents, do you see here? Now, what are we going to do this year? What are we going to do this year? I'm going to make it 5. Okay. So this year, we're going to collect refuse. We're going to recycle some, and we're going to send some. Now, my question to you, I want you to read the argument and answer this question. Last year, we sent 10 truckloads for incineration. Now, how many truckloads for incineration will we send this year if we collect 10 times as much refuse as we did last year? Given the information in the argument, how many truckloads do you think we're going to send this year if we collect 10 times as many truckloads of refuse, or 10 times as much refuse as we collected last year? How many truckloads do you think we'll send this year? Come on, I got 40 responses on my MCQ. I only have 10, 15 responses so far. If we collect 10 times as much refuse this year, how many trucks do you think we'll send for incineration this year? 10 times as compared to this. So the total garbage collected is 10 times as much as we did last year. So I have 21. Come on, more responses. This is the crux of this question. The answer is in the argument itself. 26. Let's get to 30. 27. 3 more. Can I get 3 more people to really answer this question? All right. 3, 2, and 1. I got my 30. So 1/3 of you think it's 50, 1/3 of you think it's 100, 27% of you think it's 5, and 2 of you think it's, or 7% think it's 10. The correct answer is 5. 5 truckloads, despite so much refuse. Let's read this. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number to half of last year's number. What it's saying is, if we sent 10 truckloads last year, then regardless of the amount of garbage that we collect, we're only going to send half as many truckloads as we sent last year. Can you see this? Okay. So regardless of, now you can. And this is the beauty of visualization. When you read and visualize. So even if you collect 10x as much, you sent 10 last year, you're only going to send 5 this year. Okay. So again, the same thing. Under what conditions will the ash generated be more than 50% if I only send half as many truckloads? The only condition is if we pack those trucks so tightly that ash per truckload becomes super high. Okay. Yeah, half of last year, so it will be 5 years. Okay. So my assumption is that ash per truckload is similar to or lower than what it was last year. Okay. Clear with the assumption? Right? Let's go through the answer choice analysis. Okay, choice A is actually that choice where it's a must be true choice, but it doesn't provide any new information. You remember, one of the first pieces of an assumption is it must provide new information. You can infer this from the argument. Choice B is about cost. Cost is immaterial here. We don't care about that. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Don't care about that. Okay. Choice D is the correct answer. You can see the negation of choice D as well. So I'm going to share the PDF with you. You can read that as well. And choice E is the total quantity of refuse. We already negated that. It's immaterial, the total quantity. Okay, why? Because I'm going to send half as many truckloads. So your takeaway from this question. What's your takeaway? What did you learn? Visualize, visualize, visualize. Visualize, follow the process. Visualize, follow the process. You do that, you get every question right. When I make mistakes, I either don't visualize or I don't follow the process. These are the only 2 places where I make a mistake. Okay. Yes, that's not just in CR, but in MSR as well as in TPA and quant. Okay. This is not rocket science. Let me be very, very clear. So how do you go there? The first fundamental is to visualize and classify the given statement. And that's something which is really, really critical. Why? Because if you visualize, your timing improves automatically. Why? Because your clarity as to how to move forward. Again, you need to have the concept. You need to be able to identify the conclusion. You need to be able to build the logical structure. That's really, really important overall. You need to, once you visualize, once you're able to classify statements, once you build that logical structure, then you need to formulate the pre-thinking question. And you've got to understand what that choice is saying when you're evaluating the answer choices. Okay. One of the other things, were there close answer choices here? When you look at the incorrect options, none of them were correct, right? It wasn't that if the correct answer were not there, then you would choose this as correct. No, that didn't exist. The so-called close answer choices or the so-called popular incorrect answer choices were absolutely incorrect. It's just that they seem tempting. You might call them tempting, don't call them close, because when you call them close, what you're telling your brain is that if the correct answer choice were not there, then this is there. Okay, and you start congratulating yourself for choosing the close answer. There is no thin line. Please let me be very clear. There is no thin line. The moment you use the word thin line, what you're really saying is, if the correct option were not there, then that other close answer would have been correct. Isn't that what you're saying when you say that the thin line? That's wrong. What I'm trying to tell you is, if the correct option were not there, then the test would have to replace it with another correct option. That tempting choice would not be correct even in that scenario. Let me be very clear. Okay. Another statistic in hard questions. Let me put a note here. In hard question, and this is really important. In hard questions, what is, when you do the percentages, what is that? What percentage is this? What do you think? What percentage is most popular incorrect plus the correct option? Can you guess? Simple math. I'm asking you a simple math. It's usually about 83, 80 odd percent. Let's call it this way. So, you know, now what you're really saying is, if you choose the most popular incorrect and you've already rejected correct, so you're among the 80% of folks. Okay. What score are you aiming for? What GMAT score are you aiming for? 90th percentile. 720 is what? 94th percentile. So can you be top 6 for 2 percentile if you mathematically? Simple math. You can't. Stop congratulating yourself. Rather, when you make a mistake, and mark my words, you will make mistakes. That's okay. But when you make a mistake, don't give yourself a pat on the back. Figure out what you need to learn from that question, because that's an opportunity to improve. Really, really important. There are no close answer choices. There are just correct and incorrect answer choices on the GMAT. Okay. And when you make a mistake, you're going to make a mistake in each one of these 4. As you do this, first 1 and 2, you're going to get to that 40th percentile. If you do 1, 2, and 3 correctly, you're going to get to that 60th percentile ability. As you do 1, 2, and 3 better and better, you get to 80, 85th percentile. Okay. But again, as you attain mastery on all grounds, that's when you get to 90th, 95th. And even when you make mistakes, what's hard accuracy for a 95th percentile? Can you guys tell me? What's the hard accuracy that you need to attain if you want to get to 95th percentile? No, what is the hard accuracy? Accuracy on hard question, not 50%. It's not that low. It's about 75%, 70 to 75%. So you will make mistakes on 25 to 30% hard questions if you want to get 95th percentile. Okay, and this is simple math. But if you want to get there, you've got to take one step at a time. You can't do multiple steps. You've got to start with learning concepts and application, and that's something which is absolutely paramount over here. And this is the step where, if you're someone who's at a 30th percentile, 70% of your time would be spent on it, where When you learn concepts, learn application, your primary goal is to improve ability. That's really important, which means that your focus is on building that foundation, understanding how to classify statements, and building that visualization skill. When doing it consistently and excelling on one skill at a time, that's really important. Then you go into master application. This is what we call as the cementing phase, which is where you achieve 80th percentile. So at this point, you go from the 30th to 50th, 50th to 55th. Again, this is a non-linear phase. As I said, 70% of your time would be spent here, but you'd go from a 30th to a 55th percentile. But that leap is very, very important. That sets your foundation. From there, as you get to master application, that's about 15% of your time. For most people, it's 2 to 3 days. Okay, 2 to 3 days means about between 5 to 9 hours. Okay, um, and this is where you'd hit those metrics where you're hitting about 55 to 60% accuracy in hard questions, 80 to 90% accuracy in medium question, and that's where you see the cementing quiz metrics over there. And then from this point, you isolate your specific weakness. So that 80th to 90th percentile ability is once you isolate the specific weakness and execute those improvement plans. And that's where deep analytics, those are really, really important over here. Before this, proper preparation, one thing at a time, feedback every 30 minutes. Before that, that's something which is important. Here, you have deep analytics, that's important. Okay. If you're an e-GMAT, you already have the most comprehensive resource. Please don't study anything else. Go through the study plan. When it comes to giving you fundamentals, learning concepts, learning application, practicing, you have 7, 8 times as many questions as you'd get on the official guide. So use them properly. Don't use any other resource. Leverage the sequence in which we build ability. Leverage the solutions that are there. Okay. Here's an example of fundamentals, just premise and conclusion. That's a good 2 hours of content. Building visualization, our inference module, one of the best places to build visualization, and it's one of the most comprehensive modules over here. It's about 9 hours, where you start with actually drawing inferences from a single statement, understanding what only and all do, what some, most, and the do with regards to a statement, because these things are tested over here. Learning visualization, drawing inferences from multiple statements here. And again, each one of these comes with feedback that's personalized to you. Over here, you can see that these are not completions, these are percentage scores. There's an evaluation built into each one of these, and that's important. Similarly, as you go into assumption, look at the amount of detail. You learn assumption for every argument type. Again, look at the amount of time spent by people here. And look at the evaluation here. You revise this after getting a low score, you hit 100% the next one. Okay. So as you go through just the assumption module, you will have completed all of this. And then you go through evaluate, strengthen, weaken, very similar structure, just so much detail that you won't find it anywhere else. Okay. Now, as you go towards mastering application, that's where you have to hit metrics. Here's an example of a student who started after finishing the course, who started with cementing quizzes. The first couple of quizzes, he didn't hit the metrics. But then because he persisted, he learned from his mistakes. Look at that, 80% accuracy in hard, 60% accuracy over here. He started to repeat this. And when you do this, this is where you can see the increase in accuracy as well as the reduction in timing. And these are scholarly analytics. This is not a graph drawn in Excel. This is our platform does this. We track your accuracy in your last 30 attempts, 16 to 30, last 15. So you can track your improvement overall. And that's really important. This is where deep analytics come in, because if you just do aggregate accuracy, even if you improve, you won't be able to track that. Okay. And you can see all of this over here. This is last 20, last 10, last 30, easy, medium, hard. The single chart for every subsection, whether you're talking about verbal, DI, or quant, you can do all of this over here. Yep. And when you do this, that's when you have this improvement. You can really track that improvement. You don't need an expert. to help you guide this. Why? Because the platform does that, and which is where we invest so much money in building that platform overall. Okay. Here's a guy who went from 42nd percentile to 99th percentile overall, and again, very smart guy. But the reason why he was stuck on 42nd percentile is because essentially uh, he wasn't consistent in answering questions. He answered some hard questions correctly, but then a bunch of other hard questions he'd make mistakes. Why? Because he didn't have a formal process. Okay. Use that system and make sure you come here. Be one of those 700 plus scorers. Okay. And if you're looking at GFE, it's our commitment to give you the most comprehensive course. There are only 3 companies that offer courses for the Focus Edition today, and no one comes close when it comes to offering a personalized study planner or giving courses with videos in them, or the number of DI questions or the full length mocks. We've released. Has anyone taken a GFE mock on the platform? Anyone over here who's taken the GFE mock? Okay. They're the only company outside of the official, the GMAC, that has released GFE mocks. They've released 3 mocks, 2 more are coming. Okay. If you haven't used our mock, try taking that. You'll find some really good insights overall. And GFE mocks are not cheap. The 2 mocks cost what, $120 right now if you buy the official mocks. Okay. So with that, try out the free trial. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me share the session PDF so you guys can download the handout. Okay. With that, feedback on the webinar and any other question that you have, I'd be happy to answer that. And here's the link to connect with me on my LinkedIn. Guys, feedback on the webinar, and if you have any questions, you can answer those. And Saikat, thank you for that feedback. All right, I have a couple of questions here. I see one in the short on support. I see one here. Can you get mentor support if you're stuck to improve in any part? Yeah, I mean, we have 5 strategy experts who'll tell you why you're faltering, where your metrics are not right if you don't know how to read them. Now, if you want private tutoring, that's something that we'll have to figure out how to do that. But absolutely, we do have people who really look at your data and tell you this is where you're faltering. If you're stuck, let's say you're stuck at a 68th percentile in any subsection, they'll tell you within that subsection these type of questions is where you're faltering. And if you read our reviews, you're going to really see how people praise our mentors over there. Do CR and 2-part have many similarities? So 2-part on the verb, 2-part has 2-part quant and 2-part verbal. And if you log into the e-GMAT course, you can really navigate to 2-part. Even if you're not a paid student, you can see the course structure. So 2-part verbal has inference type and CR type questions. So yes, in that way, there's a lot of similarity overall. How long does it take to improve from a 545 to a 675? It's usually about 3 months or so. 675 is at 730 equivalent, and so yeah, you need about 3 months overall. Okay. How many hours of course is there for the Focus Edition? So I think that a lot of people ask this question because a lot of people when they look at other courses, they say, "But to finish the course." So e-GMAT, we probably, if I were to really put in the number of hours of course that we have, I'd probably put it at close to 400 hours or so. The question is, do you need 400 hours? Most people don't, unless and until you're absolutely starting at a 335 or so. you won't need 400 hours, and which is where the beauty of our tech platform is. For example, in quant, as you go through our quant course, the platform adjusts the course length based on what it evaluates as your ability is. And so the course contracts, there are people who actually go through the quant course in about 30 hours, and there are others who need about 140 hours. And again, it all depends on their starting ability, and the system determines that. So yeah, how long is our course? About 400 hours or so. Do you need those 400 hours? Probably not. Most people need between, if I were to really put on a median over here, between 130 and 270 hours. Gave the online score a 690. Not really happy with the score. That's good to know. I strongly believe if you're that close, you should aim for a 740. I did score an 8 on the IR. Can I infer the GFE is more suited to my taste? Um, I think you're in an interesting place, is what I would say. It depends on what that 690 is composed of and what your data is. If you're an e-GMAT, we can figure the data out and we can really tell you how much effort it would be um, you'd need to improve on the current edition as well as on the focus edition. Now, to answer, so my answer to whether you should take the classic edition or the GFE depends on two things. One is, I look at, when you say it's more to my taste, my answer to this is, my answer, I just recorded a video but a couple of weeks back, which is the GMAT focus edition hard? And hard for me is depends on two things. One is, how long would you take to get to a certain score, and the second is, do you like studying that content? So how long would you take? We can estimate based on that 690 and the GFE bar diagnostic. Okay. Um, Whether you like GFE more than the content for the current edition is something that you have to tell us, and based on that, we can um, we can make a good judgment. So I see a Q50 V35. Um, uh, Again, I've got to figure out clearly, verbals where the headroom is, but within verbal, is it SC, is it CR, is it RC? And so I think that's something where if you've taken a Sigma X mock, we can really figure that out fairly easily. Or if you take a GFE mock, we can figure that out. We kind of work with very concrete data. I hate to be wrong, and the way I ensure that I'm right is I look at data. Will PACE be implemented in SC, CR, and RC? It will be. I think our first goal is to implement PACE. And PACE, for those of you who don't know, is a personalized adaptive course engine. I was talking about Quant, where we build custom courses. We launched PACE in Quant a year and a half back or so. We've saved about 6 million hours of redundant learning using PACE. Um, so yeah, and so pace, I think, will first come in DI and then it'll go in CR and RC. It won't come in SC just because SC is going away. But CR and RC definitely. We don't need SC for GFE. Yeah, the SC section is there because about 60% of our students are still taking the current edition. So SC will go away after 31st of January. Do you think it's easy to move from a 435 to a 655 in the Focus Edition? No, I won't say it's easy. Let me be very clear. Okay, it's. You've heard me say this. Nothing is rocket science here. I stand by that. But I'll also say nothing's easy because you still have to find time to study. And one of the big things that working professionals struggle with is to consistently find time. So it's not easy. I don't want uh, 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 to actually say that whatever sacrifices you make and whatever effort you put in is it's easy. Anyone can get to a 655. No, that's not the case. But what I can really tell you is we will give you a trackable way to get to that 655. So you won't be in a situation where you're studying for 2 months and you take a mock and you're surprised. That's not going to happen. You'd get feedback on your progress every 30 minutes. We spend $10 million building tech so that you get this feedback. But you will have to put in the hours. That 435 to 655 is that 300 to 340 hours or so. And yes, you do need to take this the mock, whether you take the current edition mock or the Sigma X current edition or the Focus edition, to determine the length of the course. Yes, pace is wonderful, and I'm going to tell Pyle. Pyle is the one who builds the courses that we need to build that for DI as well. And DI is built with Pace Engine in mind. Okay. With that, thank you very much. It was wonderful having you guys, and I'd like to see you on e-GMAT.com. So take a look at the free trial, see if this is the course for you. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.